interested in whether men could return from space safely. I knew that somebody was going to orbit a satellite very soon, and that the ICBM capabilities were such that a man could probably be put up there. And as I said, as soon as they decided that a man should go up, the question was, could you bring him back safely? So I drew on some work that a fellow by the name of Harvey Allen out at the Ames lab did that established that very blunt shapes were the shapes to be used for reentry. But up to that time, it was applied to missiles, warheads that entered very steeply. And a man, in order to keep the accelerations down and so forth, would come in at a very shallow angle, just brushing the atmosphere and re-entering much more slowly. That would produce a much greater heat input. The heating rate itself would be lower, but the heating would be higher. So I took these formulas that Harvey Allen had developed and calculated reentries with these shallow reentry angles that were for man. And found out that, yes, it did seem practical that the G's developed were about 8G, which with a properly positioned man could be withstood. And the heating rates and total heat input was such that you could protect a very blunt body with something like a beryllium heat shield, something that could very easily absorb the heat. I didn't do anything with that. That was back in February 1957. But NACA was working on a new high-speed program. They'd already, of course, flown the Bill X-1 airplane at supersonic speeds, and they were just about to fly the X-15 airplane. It would go up to about 5 times the speed of sound. And they began investigating the possibilities of flying an airplane that would go up to about 12 times the speed of sound. And this they called round 3, X-1 being round 1, X-15 being round 2. This would be the round 3 situation. Both Ames and Langley were working on this type of thing, and Ames, where Harvey Allen was, decided it should be somewhat of a blunt shape. They more or less used a cone sliced in two as the type of body that they were looking at. The Langley people decided they were going to look at a highly swept delta wing with a flat bottom, emphasizing the fact that a large lift-to-drag ratio would be a good thing to do. And the reason they did that was because they were envisioning trajectories which the craft would come in and then skip out of the atmosphere any number of times. A low drag was very important for that particular maneuver. But they intended to go to the Ames laboratory. The Langley people intended to go to the Ames laboratory and try to settle this situation. And before they went, they decided to have a meeting to really discuss the pros and cons of the two approaches. And they always would invite somebody from the flight division, which I was a member of, over, even though we were not really supposed to be dealing in space. We were supposed to be dealing with airplanes. But we were the only ones that had manned flight experience, so we always would be invited, and I was invited over to this meeting. And near the end of the meeting, it was discussed, and I think this was just after Sputnik flew. It was either just before or just after. But a discussion took place about return from orbit. And I spoke up and told them that once you're in orbit, lift to drag, high lift and low drag didn't mean a thing, because in orbital flight, the flight is capable of sustaining itself, and drag is minimum anyway because you're really outside the atmosphere. And that what you have to worry about is getting the man back safely, and there you wanted the most drag possible. So they somewhat, which I say ignored that input, but they did go out to Ames, and I believe Harvey Allen presented a very similar argument. But meanwhile, I said, gee, I really hadn't developed what kind of a body or what kind of a configuration was I talking about. And I thought it over, and ultimately came up with the idea that we should have a winged vehicle that came in at very high angles of attack, almost broadside. Very similar to the shuttle, but even higher angles of attack, because at that time, heat protection was more difficult. Went over and talked to my boss about this, and he agreed it was a fairly good idea. But when the Langley people came back, Max Faget was a part of the committee that went to Ames. When he came back, he had the idea of the Mercury capsule shape, which is really a conical section of a sphere, as it was originally envisioned. If you envision cutting a conical section out of into a sphere, this is the type of shape you would get. There was a considerable argument about which of these approaches would be best, and then the man that was in charge of the round three still wanted to maintain his approach. So in early January of 1958, the laboratory hierarchy decided they'd have a design competition. And so my particular group from the flight division worked on this delta wing high angle attack approach. Max and his people from Pilots Aircraft Research Division worked on his approach, and Johnny Becker, the fellow that was really pushing the round three, worked on that approach. And regardless of what we did, the wing configurations came out weighing 2 to 3 times as much as the capsule. And it became apparent that we didn't have the launch vehicles that were at that time that was capable of lifting a winged vehicle. So Bob Gilruth, who was charged with making the decision on that, opted for the so-called capsule. And the wing vehicle sort of dropped by the wayside at that particular time. Johnny Becker wanted to continue the argument and came over to see me about it, but I told him no. I thought the decision was right.